Growing up in Kansas with Depression era parents, it's funny because in a lot of ways I was raised like my mother, and I was even raised like my 80-year-old mother-in-law. Some of the traditions just stuck, and my mother just did things the way she knew to do them and the way she had always done them. But Kansas comes with some rich history as well as the farmland that everybody knows about and the wide open spaces. There's a lot of history to Kansas. So I'm going to share some of that with you today, along with some of my memories of growing up in Kansas with Depression era parents. And I hope you enjoy this video. Hi, I'm Bonita and I am early retired. I'm not old enough yet for Social Security. I'm living on a low income and I am living off of savings. I live in Kansas on a farm and I have a donkey. This is Brownie. I have frugal videos all year round, and I hope that you will join me this year as we share ways to save money and live our dreams. So as you can see, I'm finally home from all of my travel this year. I hope to be home most of the rest of this year, except for my 10 days that I will be working at the state fair and possibly the election booth days. Other than that, I don't have any plans to travel, but that can always change. So this weekend, we were seeing my mother and father-in-law, and they live about 3.5 hours from here. So on my way back from my sons, I met my husband and we drove to where they were. So I had about 7 hours of travel that day. And I thought, I'm going to stop along the way and see some of these little historical markers and things that I have always wanted to stop by and see. I've never had the time to do it. So I did that. I'm going to share with you some of the rich history that I discovered this weekend in Southeast Kansas. My mother-in-law and I got to visiting this weekend, and it's so funny that we grew up so much the same way when she's 20 years older than me. She grew up also getting her hair washed only on Saturday, and that's how I grew up. My mom did the same thing, and my mom was born in 1931. And of course, they didn't have indoor water at that time. So doing things like that was a big undertaking. And I think that's why they only did it on Saturdays. But even when I grew up and we had running water, we still only washed hair on Saturdays. And then I would sit for like 2 hours while she parted my hair perfectly into little squares and rolled up my hair into curlers. And my mother-in-law had the same thing, only her mother just did ringlets with her finger and bobby pins. But I had those old-fashioned stickery type of curlers that had the big plastic needle that held them in place and dug into your head. And then I would wear them all night long on Saturday night and have to sleep in them, which was incredibly difficult. And then they came out Sunday morning before church, so your hair would look perfect for church. And I think that's why it was always done on Saturdays. And then by Friday, my curls would have been stretched out and my hair would be getting greasy, but we didn't wash until Saturday. I also grew up learning how to drive in a pasture first and then a dirt road second. And that training was so invaluable as I grew up. And it's imperative where I live. Many people have wrecks on dirt roads because they don't know how to drive in sand, gravel, heavy sand, mud. There's so many different things that a dirt road can throw at you. So learning to drive on a dirt road was so important. Going through mud or any type of huge puddle, you need to go through fast enough that you don't get stuck, but slow enough that you don't wreck. So it is a fine art to do that. And as I travel and I see all of these student drivers on the road in the cities, I think, man, it would be so hard to teach someone to drive in these cities just right out of the gates. Because when I grew up, we started out here. And when I taught my kids, I taught them the same way. pasture driving, then dirt driving, then highway driving. And then we moved to city driving or small town driving before we even got to the city driving. So, those of you that have had to teach kids to drive in the city, I applaud you because that would be very, very difficult and very, very frightening. But not only did we drive our cars in the pasture, there were small pilots out here that landed in pastures. And on my way back from my son's, I stopped by Beaumont, Kansas. Beaumont, Kansas has probably the only little airport cafe that I even know exists. You can fly your plane in and land in the field. It even has airport parking for you to stay at the historic motel and eat at the cafe. They have an RV site behind the cafe. And in 1949, one of the pilots from Wichita got a hold of them and said, "Is there any way I can fly my small plane down there and have somewhere to land so I can check my cattle?" They let him land on Main Street and pilot in. And that became very popular for other small pilots to pilot in, land on Beaumont Main Street, and then park their airplanes for about 4 years between the late 40s and the early 50s. They still allow them to land down there, just not on Main Street now, but they have a historic plane there that you can see from that era. They also have a historic wooden Frisco water tower, an old depot, such rich history on kind of a one street town. So if you're out and about and you see there's a historical marker, I have found that they are worth stopping at. So many times we think we're in a hurry and we don't have time, but if you ever have the time to pull in and read that, it is usually always worth your while. I grew up going to church every Sunday in a very small old church that had been moved from another community. And it didn't have air conditioning, it did have electricity, and it didn't have a bathroom. We even had a porta potty at this old fashioned church that was over 100 years old. So when we went to Topeka, Kansas the other day, we stopped by the Topeka Museum, and out back they have a one-room schoolhouse that looks very similar to the church that I grew up in. It even has the porta potty out back, and it even has the cloakroom in the front, like I had in the church where I grew up, where you could hang your coats. If you ever happen to pass through Pittsburgh, Kansas, it is over by Joplin, Missouri. It's not far from the Arkansas border as well, but they are the Pittsburgh Gorillas at their state university there. And all through the entire town of Pittsburgh, there are gorillas of every shape, size, and color in front of the businesses to show support. So that's kind of fun to just take a trip through town and see the variety of gorillas. I also stopped by Greenbush, Kansas. Greenbush is another small little burg that you pass through, but it has the ruins of one of their churches that burnt down, that was built in 1902. The story goes that Father Philip Colleton was caught at this site by a furious hail and thunderstorm. The frightened priest took refuge under his saddle and vowed if his life was spared, he would build a church at this spot. The church that he built was completed in 1871 and it was destroyed by another storm in 1877. Over time, there has been 4 different churches that have been erected on this site. And there stands a second church on this site that was remodeled from the 1881 church. Throughout Kansas, you may also find some very old-fashioned type businesses that you may not see in other places. We still have some little burger and ice cream joints where you have to stand outside in line to place your order and wait for your order. I found this one when I was going through Fredonia, Kansas, and it reminded me of the one that I grew up going to after baseball games. We would stop there and get an ice cream cone when I was in junior high. The one that I grew up going to was only open in the summers. Throughout Kansas, you will also see a fair amount of wind turbines. I saw a lot of these through southeast Kansas. I also saw a lot of signs that said no wind farms. A lot of the older farmers do not like this. They feel like it's taking up good farmland. And actually, all of this energy doesn't even stay in Kansas. It goes up around the Chicago area to help give them energy. And I know one of my neighbors is very upset because she says it has taken away from her peace in sitting outside in the evening. She can see a large field of wind turbines that are blinking red constantly, and it takes up the entire night sky. One of the things we're so proud of out here in rural Kansas is being able to see the stars and see them so clearly because there are no city lights that interfere with seeing the night sky. We have even had an observatory come out to our back pasture just to be able to see the stars better. You have to get a long way from the city without that glow to see the stars so beautifully. Many of the crops grown here in Kansas are, of course, wheat and corn, which we are most known for. But we also grow canola, we grow soybeans, we grow cotton. And most recently, I was in the city, and right between a Sonic and a strip mall was a cornfield. This is one of the things that I love around Kansas, holding on to those traditions with a tight fist. So sometimes it's just really curious what you will see as you're going through some of these areas. As many of you know, I grew up very old fashioned and I still live pretty old fashioned compared to a lot of people. My dad was a farmer. He drove tractors and combines with no cab, no air conditioning. He wore a face mask because he had bad allergies. He fixed his own machinery when it broke down. We took in tires to get patched. I never really hear people talk about that anymore, but tires were patched all the time when I was growing up. Buying a new tire was just almost unheard of. And I grew up even in my home without AC. We go without it most of the time here. Right now, I have a little fan beside me. It's in the 90s today, and I have a bag of frozen packs sitting on a tea towel behind my fan, and it's blowing super cold air. I'm extremely comfortable. So I look for ways to save. I know a lot of people wouldn't even consider doing some things like this, but I look at all of these things as working for myself, saving myself money. And that's how I was raised. So many things were done DIY, whether it was building a garage. My dad built his own. He built my brother's with my brother. These things were considered normal in the era and the community that I grew up in. No one would have hired someone to build them a garage back then. And it probably would have been even embarrassing to have asked for that because people in that era and in this area were expected to either know or learn how to do these things for themselves. My dad would go and pick up his own parts, repair his own machinery, whether it was the combine, the tractor, the baler. He would sit out there for hours and repair his own machinery. We were very small farmers. We were relying only on the harvest in the summer to make it through the entire year. Extra money just wasn't spent on things like that when you were running your own farm. I love it that I see so many things are coming back into being popular by doing things for yourself. It's one of the best ways we can tackle inflation today is to do our own cooking and DIY as much as we can rather than hire it out. My dad always did all of his own oil changes. Yes, we did have some places here within, I don't know, 20 miles or so that you could go and get a tractor tire if you needed it or help them repair equipment. But oil changes back then were just commonly done in your front yard with an oil pan to collect your oil. And then you would put it back in a big empty barrel and have it recycled. I know many of you love it when I share some of these old fashioned memories with you, and several of you have asked to know and see more about Kansas. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Kansas is rich in history. It is inexpensive living when you get out into the rural areas like I live. The cities can be more expensive with property taxes and such, but I have found such value, and it has helped me save money to live in a rural area and just drive back and forth to work all of my 40 working years. A lot of people out here have done it their entire lives. They don't think anything about driving an hour each way to work every single day because the bonuses of living out here with our night sky, our open areas, the peace and quiet, it's just immeasurable. Thanks for watching today. I hope that if you see a historical marker, maybe you can take the time to pull over and see what it says, because so often our histories are on those little brown signs and we're driving right by. I hope to see you in the next video.